Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tracy Show, which should have started at 8 o'clock, but I got held up. And so I'm here with my guest. I'm going to let him introduce himself here in a couple of seconds. But first, I want to invite everybody um, to like this video. Please comment. We got open comments tonight, but even if you see this video after, you can always comment, and we'll make sure if you have comments for our guests, we'll get them to him. We will get those questions to him. Remember to subscribe to this page. I'm still stuck at 138. I would love, I think 1,000 is out for this year, but I would love to get to 300. 300 would make me feel so good. I have 310 videos with 138 subscribers. So that math is not mathing to me. So if you can subscribe, it literally costs nothing. I am so glad to have my guest here tonight, and I will let him introduce himself.
Well, thank you for having me. And my name is Chase Oliver. I'm a candidate for president of the United States with the Libertarian Party. And, I am 38 years old. I'll be 39 on election day, exactly half of Donald Trump's age. And I'm looking to be the third choice on the ballot for all those Americans who are going to be very dissatisfied with seeing Biden versus Trump 2.0. I want to make sure that they have an awesome choice to vote for that's full of energy, enthusiasm, and that wants to fight for their inherent rights and liberty. So, with that being said, I look forward to speaking with you today and hearing hopefully from your audience. If we can get some comments and questions in, I look forward to answering those. But really, let me just give you my elevator pitch. If you're not committing any kind of violence or force against somebody, so force, fraud, coercion, theft, or violence, anything like that, if you're not doing that against anybody else, your life should be your life and not the government's. Any interaction you have with the government should at best be voluntary for the most part, as much as possible. Because, if you're not harming anybody, your life's your life, your business is your business, your faith is your faith, who you love is who you love, your free expression is all yours. And so that's what I hope to fight for as a presidential candidate, and return power away from Washington, D.C., and give it back to each and every individual out there.
Great, and we already have a comment from Kiko. Hi, I know you were early in this, so I apologize for getting to your comment. Looking forward to the interview. Great guest, thank you. So, I have a lot of questions. Now, I've had libertarians on the show before, and I tell each libertarian guest we're probably not going to agree on a whole lot of subjects, but I'm going to try to stay on those subjects which I think we can agree on. Because I think that would be a better discussion. We could get into some things where I'm like, okay, I don't agree with that, but no candidate is perfect. So, first question I always ask, you told us the office that you're running for. How can I phrase this question? Well, there's I don't know what state you're from, but there's city council, mayor, state rep, governor. What made you think president of the United States?
Well, that's a great question. And, I've actually run for office twice before. I ran in 2020 for Congress. The reason why I did that is because John Lewis had passed away. He's a civil rights icon in the city of Atlanta. And there was a special election to fill out the remainder of his term. And unlike most elections, there was not a signature requirement to get on the ballot. Normally, for a libertarian or any other third party to get on the ballot in Georgia, you need to have 35,000 signatures, which is one of the highest signature requirements in the country. And so it's very hard for us to get on the ballot for, say, city council or, not city council, but for, county commission or for Congress or state senate or state assembly. All those races, any partisan races that are below statewide, are very hard for libertarians to get on the ballot. Now, we do have statewide ballot access. And that's how in 2022, I was able to run for the United States Senate. I ran in the race against Herschel Walker and Senator Raphael Warnock. And in doing so, I got enough of the vote to force a runoff between the two. It was over 80,000 votes, and it provided national news and attention for the Libertarian Party. And I think I articulate our message and our philosophy very well And I think particularly in 2024, when we're going to have Donald Trump versus Joe Biden 2.0, two candidates who are at or over 80 years old, I think it's important for the Libertarian Party to distinguish itself by having a candidate who represents a generational shift and who's going to bring kind of new ideas and a fresh perspective, as opposed to what the two old parties have been bringing us. I say it's 20th century politics in the 21st century. And, we're almost a quarter of the way through the 21st century. It's time for millennials and really for Gen Z to really start rising up and taking their place in the political body.
So you just brought up something I totally forgot. I forgot that you're in Georgia. I don't know why I thought Utah, but now that you said that, I'm like, that was the debate where Raphael Warnock kept addressing Herschel Walker, but he wasn't there, and it was like
Hmm.
an empty post. Okay, that's the one. Okay, because I thought, wow, why doesn't he address the guy that's like actually standing? Because he's like standing right there.
I
He's
mean,
literally right there.
1.5 feet to my left, he was standing.
And I also want to ask. I'm going to ask definitely about the Libertarian Party in its terms of how you all decide who the candidate is. I'm assuming there's a ton of Libertarian candidates that are seeking the same nomination that you are.
There's about, I would say, 5 or 6 of us who are seriously running, who are doing some campaigning. Of course, there's always people who will put their name, they'll file to run, but don't really do a lot of campaigning. But among who I would say our serious slate is about 5 or 6 of us, which is actually it's smaller than our 2020 slate. We had about maybe 10 candidates who are running in that election that kind of whittled their way down as we got towards convention. But yeah, I would say 6 of us who are seriously going for it right now.
Okay, so here's what I want to ask, and I haven't asked a lot of candidates this. I normally ask my leftist candidates this, but I'm going to ask you this same question, but I'm going to change it up a little bit. So, what do you say to people that says a vote for you is a vote for Joe Biden?
Yeah. So that's a question we get all the time, the spoiler question. Well, the thing I first say is, first, I can't be a spoiler because you can't spoil what's already rotten, and that's the two-party system. Most Americans know that the two-party system isn't working, and they really want more choices when polled. But when you say, a vote for me is a vote for Joe Biden, well, the truth is, we are participants in the system that we are given to us. So libertarian voters and other voters who want to vote outside the two-party system, they are merely participating in the system they have in front of them. And is there a spoiler effect? You could say that. But the truth is that system was created by the Republicans and Democrats in power. And so I say if they don't want their election spoiled, they should give us things like ranked choice voting or approval voting that allow for more participatory democracy. Ranked choice voting, you put your first choice in the ballot, and if they're not, if it goes to an instant runoff, your second choice is counted if your first choice is eliminated. It allows for broad representation. It allows for more civil elections. But we have to ask that Republicans and Democrats give that to us because they're the ones in power. If they don't want their election spoiled, they need to give us better ways to participate in our democracy. And the truth is right now in our presidential election year, about only 60% of the country votes. And that's because 40% of the country sees a two-party system and they feel completely apathetic. If we really want to engage 100% of our population to get more involved in our participatory democracy, it involves more choices and more voices. And we will keep spoiling elections until that's provided to us. Whether it wins one side or the other of the duopoly, to me, I take just as many votes. We take just about as many votes from Republicans as we do Democrats. And really the lion's share of our votes comes from independents. And if their candidates can't attract that independent vote, that's their fault, not mine. We're just participating in the system that's put in front of us.
I definitely am glad you said ranked choice voting. That's something for my audience that I plan on bringing on a guest who's working on that in our state. And I've always wondered, it took me a while to understand what it truly means because I understand winner take all. You get the most votes, you win. That's just something, it doesn't take a lot to explain. But once it was explained to me, oh, you did this in junior high school. I'm like, oh my goodness, why didn't somebody explain that to me? Because then it was like, oh, okay, it clicks. Talk about, um, I don't know where your campaign is in terms of your volunteers. What state? let me backtrack. What states are you concentrating on? Do you have a 50 state plus the seven other ones, or do you have just like 20 states and you're concentrating on those 20 states?
Yeah, so right now we're kind of in the primary process, so to speak, for the Libertarian nomination. And so I'm actually in the middle of just over the middle actually of traveling to all 50 states in the union to speak to libertarians in each and every state, to participate in events in every state. We've just passed 33 states, and I'm about to do a tour through New England, so I think I'm adding 3 new states to that list as well. By the end of the year, I'll have traveled to 44 states, and by our convention in May, I'll hit all 50. And the reason being is I think it's important for the delegates at our convention who will be picking our nominee to see that I'm able to run a 50-state campaign, that I have the energy, that we have the organization, the logistics, the volunteer force to be able to participate, and the donor support, most importantly, to be able to get all this done. But when it comes to the general election, there's definitely metrics to victory beyond like winning outright. And that's focusing on states that require us to maintain ballot access with a certain percentage of the vote, to earn major party status with a certain percentage of the vote. And of course, we want to identify libertarian races, particularly at the local level all over the country, that our presidential campaign can support with media and logistics and getting people out to a rally to support and get voters registered. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help those easily winnable races, even as we are facing, of course, the uphill battle it takes to fight the two-party system at the presidential level. So even without winning the White House, there's actually lots of victories we can win as libertarians with a really well-run, professionalized presidential campaign. And that's kind of what I'm aiming to do. But right now, I'm in the middle of hitting every single state in the country, traveling all over, meeting people from all over the country, seeing that broad diversity of our country. And of course, trying regional food everywhere I go, because that's one of the things I love to do. And actually, I collect magnets. Every time I travel to a state, I get a magnet with that state on it to kind of commemorate my travel. So I'm working on getting to all 50 of the states. And of course, during the general election, if I can travel out to Puerto Rico and Guam and the other territories, I'd love to do it. So let's see how many places we can get me sent to. Absolutely.
Now, you just said something that really, it's a concern of mine with third parties. Part A, I want to meet a third party candidate. I don't care if they're Green Party, PSL, Libertarian, Constitutional, as long as they're not Democrat or Republican, that actually says, I want to win. And the
Oh,
reason I say that, and I'm glad that you said it, because I hear third party candidates say, oh, if I could just get the threshold 5%. And I'm like, no, we need to aim to win, like to start it here, finish it, and then CNN or whoever announces it says, no, Chase Oliver is the president of the United States.
yeah, and I want to win, man. I want to fight to win, and I'm going to run a campaign to win. But the thing is that short of that victory, there's other victories we can win, and I want to keep that in mind. And that's what my focus is as I travel around the country. But I absolutely want to win. I want to get in the White House, and we have to run it. Any third party candidate, honestly, any candidate for president, even the Republicans or Democrats, they have to run with the intention of winning. They have to be able to tell the American voter what they would do should they get the opportunity to get in the White House. And I would love to inhabit the White House. I would love to have a millennial voice in charge of our government when we've had, frankly, people who have been boomers since I was a child, right? Like, Bill Clinton onward have all been in the same age range. They've just aged as they've gone along. We need to have a newer, fresh voice, because really, my generation is the generation that's been fighting the war on terror for the last 20 years. My generation is the one that just as they were getting out of college, the entire real estate market just collapsed underneath them and the job market fell out. We had a major economic recession. And now it's my generation that's trying to raise families, send their kids to school, pay for their football pads and for their kids to go to ballet class and, or art camp or whatever they're doing. They're trying to afford those lives to their kids on the back of the record inflation all over the country. And so I think it's time for my generation to really rise up and start saying, enough is enough. We have to get this inflation under control, and we have to start helping people afford the cost of living, which is really what we've been making go massively out of control as we've printed trillions and trillions of dollars out of thin air. And we have to fix this. We have to start by being realistic, and we have to start by providing real solutions that you're not hearing from the two-party system. because they're interested in just fighting the same old fights. They don't want to solve the problem. They want to exacerbate the problem so they can continue to fundraise off of it. It's political pro wrestling. They're not really fighting each other in that ring. They are choreographing a performance so that you get excited, so that you spend money, and that you get your vote taken for granted. So as a libertarian, I don't want to play that game. I want to provide, solutions and really be somebody who can, a voter can say, okay, I'm voting for him because I can imagine him inhabiting the White House.
Now, I do want to talk about some of the things in the Libertarian Party that I'm questioning, if I'm just 100% honest. As a non-millennial, I'm Generation X.
We love Gen Xers.
Hopefully, but how can I say this question and it'll make sense? I believe that, as we age, Social Security is going to be a big deal for somebody my age, and obviously those who are older than I am. Either you're going to, we hear these stories about how the program isn't sustainable and it can't continue. What are your thoughts about, one, is there a Social Security problem? Two, if there's a problem, how do you propose to fix it? And three, how do you propose to get the American people to buy into whatever your solution is?
Yeah. So, my parents, they live on a fixed income. My mom works part-time, but that's because she likes the discounts she gets from working in a retail store. It's because she's a shopaholic. That's beside the point. But my parents live on a fixed income. And if Social Security and Medicare were to disappear tomorrow, we'd be in real trouble with them. They would not be able to sustain their lifestyle. And the idea that the millennial generation, that our kids could just take care of them, right? Ask any millennial and they'll tell you, do you have enough extra cash lying around to take care of your parents at this very moment? A lot of them are going to say no. That's being realistic. And so while I'm a libertarian and I want to seek free market solutions, and ultimately I do think Social Security is unsustainable, I'm not seeking to remove the benefits that people who are at retirement or near retirement are going to receive. You worked your entire life. You're expecting this to come your way. You should get that. But for workers that are my age, 40 and under, we should really realistically not expect Social Security to be there for us. We need to be looking for alternative ways to fund our retirement. And we do need to be provided an off-ramp from funding into Social Security once the generations at or near retirement have kind of completed it. And so there needs to be a gradual scaling back to where ultimately us younger workers are allowed to take our money and put it into retirement accounts that will actually produce far better results than what we get out of Social Security. And if you want to stay in the program, stay in the program. But those benefits are going to run out eventually. And we need to be realistic about that. And the truth is we can either not be realistic about it and keep paying into this system, and by the time I retire, I don't have benefits, or we can be realistic about it and give me an off-ramp to where I can start investing into more retirement for myself in the private market, and I won't get benefits. Either way, the benefits aren't going to be there. But one way, we are not providing the ability for more people to fund their own retirement outside of the Social Security system. But for workers who are who are at or near retirement, absolutely allow them to continue this, because that would be a major shock to our economy that would provide, just the markets would provide huge downturns. It would be very calamitous for us to just outright get rid of everything altogether. And while I believe in free market solutions and moving ourselves away from government funding, I do understand that we have to do this in a transitory way that doesn't provide this major shock to the economy that we then have to overcome as well. There's ways to do this with far less pain, so to speak. And I think that's the way we have to do it. So for someone your age who you said you're near retirement, you're worried about this.
Not that near.
Not that near.
Not that
near. Not that near. I'm not being real.
Not that near.
But you're closer than I am.
I'm closer than you are, yes.
Right. And so somebody who's like, say, who is at or near retirement, I would say like within 10 to 15 years of retirement, there needs to be a scaling back over past that time to where the benefits are going to decrease and your ability to pay out or pay into the system is also going to be, lessened, where you can have more money to be able to spend into the private market. But you don't do it overnight. Doing it overnight, I think, is it's never ever going to pass as legislation with Congress. You'll never get that done. And B, it would provide such a major shock to the economy that the markets would probably move into a recession over the next quarter, and I wouldn't want to see that.
So the next issue I definitely want to talk about is homelessness. Homelessness under the Biden administration has increased at least 12 to 25%, somewhere in between there. The rates of homeless people have increased. I have not heard any solution from that administration, the Trump administration. Now, I've heard other third party candidates, but I would like to hear what is your slash the Libertarians' stance or plan to basically eradicate homelessness.
Well, there's two sides to that, right? There's helping people who are currently homeless right now and ways we can help that, but then there's also the how are we going to make housing more affordable to get people off the streets, to get people to be able to provide and live for themselves. So, uh, housing, right? First and foremost, it's expensive to get a place to live. Much of this has to do with zoning requirements, particularly in our urban centers. In Atlanta, it just is. Let me just say right now, the rent is going crazy. And much of this has to do with the fact that there are so many what I call NIMBYs, not in my backyard, who refuse to have multi-unit housing built in their area because they say it'll affect their property value. I think this is bunk. I think we need to allow developers to develop whatever housing they want to develop in whatever area, particularly because there's a need for it. There's a major demand for multi-unit housing right now. That should be afforded to people. And just because you think your property value is going to be affected, well, it's not your everything around you is not your property. Your property is your property. You shouldn't be trying to prevent this development, particularly of small and tiny homes. I think tiny homes, whether you make them out of, whether you make them out of a shipping container or something like that, are great transitory housing to get people immediately off the street. And a lot of charities want to build these in city centers, and they're being prevented by government or by citizens who again are upset about their property values being affected. Like why do we want to have people living in these tiny homes in our area? It's going to affect our property value. Well, you know what's worse? Having somebody sleeping on the street in front of your home, that's going to affect your property value. And there's also a human cost to that. So I think we need to get out of the way of these people who want to develop real world solutions, and city ordinances or NIMBYs are getting in the way when they go to a city council meeting. They decry multi-unit housing or transitory housing to help people get off the streets. And then the other thing is how can we help people who are directly in need right now today? I've gone around and I've advocated for folks like Erica Brown in Columbia, South Carolina, Pastor Moses in Gastonia, North Carolina. There's a great ministry in Atlanta called Lady T Ministries. These are people who go out and they feed the homeless. They feed the people who need it directly without government involvement. They do it themselves, and they feed hundreds, if not thousands, of people every month who need their help in their neighborhoods. And people like Erica Brown, they're being threatened with city ordinances saying, well, you can't have more than 25 people here without a permit. Well, you don't know who's going to show up and who's going to need the help there. And really, should you have to pay for a permit to help the people in your neighborhood? Isn't that ridiculous? And Pastor Moses in Gastonia, North Carolina, he was allowing the homeless to camp and live on his church land. And for that, he was being fined, threatened with fines of like up to $900 a day. Should government really be doing that? Or should we be working with our local governments to actually ease the ability for people to help and provide that helping nature? That we are a loving, loving country. Our communities love to help each other. But a lot of times it's government red tape that gets in the way. I've literally seen stories of people who want to feed the homeless, and because they don't have a permit or a health inspection, authorities pour bleach all over the food that they were going to feed to people. Well, how does that help anybody? Isn't that just heartless? Oh, they might get, well, we haven't had a government inspector come inspect your kitchen when you're making those sandwiches. Well, let me just tell you right now, ask a guy on the street who hasn't eaten for a couple of days. Does he care? No. He's like, give me the sandwich. I'll eat. I'll risk the peanut butter and jelly sandwich myself, as opposed to have government get in the way. And so those direct aid, that is one of the things that as an activist upsets me the most, and why I like to work across party spectrums to get rid of these barriers to people doing good in their community. But ways we can help the actual homelessness and housing crisis is to actually remove the barriers to developing more housing, which many times it's local government, be they Republican or Democrat, like they are in the city of Atlanta, that are preventing new developers from developing multi-unit housing or transitory, small, tiny home housing to get people off the streets, to allow them a place where they feel comfortable and safe and give them the ability to actually get themselves, if they are suffering from addiction, clean and sober. But if they've just been living on the streets for a while, to give them the safety and security they need to be able to help themselves, get a job, and provide for themselves. But right now, there's too many barriers to that all over the country. And as president, I would use the bully pulpit to try to remove those barriers. But anything I can do at the national level to take those barriers down, I would certainly work towards.
I'm going to add another question to that because there's something I left out. And I used to live in an apartment, now I live in a home. And my landlords, every year they go up on the rent. It's a yearly thing. Most states, well, Indiana has a law that says you can't go up the rent more than this percentage. Well, somehow that law must have gotten rescinded because it didn't make it my way. So I went from paying $630 to now they're wanting $1,000 a month. I don't make, I still make the same amount of money. I still have more healthcare costs coming out of my check. I still have groceries that are super expensive. What do you say to people who are in the situations where they're living in apartments? Because even though housing, like a home, the interest rates are utterly ridiculous. But what do you say to, or what does your administration do to address the problem of these apartments just raising rents to unaffordable rates? Are you talking rent controls? Are you talking incentives for them to keep their costs low? What are your thoughts on that?
So most of that stuff's going to be done at the local level. I don't think you can pass a national rent control just because something like that would, just because of the broad diversity of the cost of living across the country, like what would be considered a rent control in, say, New York City is not going to be the same as what it would be, say, in like rural Alabama, right? Like there's just big differences in the cost of living. So that's why those things should be, if done at all, should be done at the local level most of all. But what I would say is the reason why cost of living is growing, even the cost of rent and the cost of food and the cost of medicine, is because we are inflating the dollar every year. Every time we print trillions of dollars out of thin air to pay for deficit spending, because that's what we do. When we spend more money than we take in as a government, we print money to make up the difference. And it's like a pie, right? If you cut a pie in half, you have two slices essentially, right? But if you say, well, we need more slices of pie, we need 4 slices now to cover the cost. Well, now you've cut it into 4. Now that pie slice is smaller than it was. And so what we're doing with our dollar is we're printing trillions of dollars out of thin air, and it's devaluing every single dollar we have. So even if you have money in savings, right, it's less valuable than it was the year before because of inflation. And this is exacerbated by the fact that we deficit spend. And so we have to get our spending under control, because what's happening right now is we're printing trillions of dollars out of thin air, and the Fed gives that to banks. They don't give that to each and every individual person. They give that to banks, who then loan it out to people with interest. So we're taking our money out of our pocket. We're being taxed to high heaven. And we're also spending more than that. And with that, they're printing money out of thin air that then goes to banks and wealthy corporate interests, doesn't go back to the individual. We're getting screwed out of that. Our money, like, we are being devalued. Each and every dollar we have is being devalued because of that. So in the long term, if we don't get spending under control, this will cause an economic collapse. This is why I say we have to cut spending. And it's why I say we have to cut like Pentagon spending massively, because we spend so much money on the war machine around the world. We need to pull that back, because that money needs to be used to pay down the deficit and the debt. There's lots of government programs that are just redundant or red tape that we don't need, or frankly, just silly uses and wastes of our money that we could be pulling back. We need to be cutting back on foreign aid. Right now, what foreign aid is you're taking tax money out of the working class in this country, and you're giving it over to the richest people in the poorest countries in the world, because it's the government that gets that, and they're the ones who distribute it, not the average person in the developing world. There are much better ways to help develop markets in the developing world, using free market practices like microloans to individual entrepreneurs overseas than foreign aid. And that can all be done privately through the marketplace. It doesn't have to be done through the government. But ultimately, with cost of living, it is a direct result of the inflationary result of our dollar. And there's not a simple solution that you can just snap our fingers and fix that, other than getting our monetary policy under control And then as far as how can we help our local communities, get out of the way of us helping our neighbors. So much, we are the most charitable nation on earth, but much of it gets just wasted. And much of it is due to the fact that we would give more if our government wasn't taking money out of our pocket and wasting it in ways where you give the government $1 and they give you back 70 cents worth of service or something like that. I think that's why I'm a small government libertarian, is because I don't think the government's going to facilitate fixing these problems as much as the free market will, and as much as our neighbors and our loving charitable hearts are going to. I think that's honestly the best way we can fix many of our problems, is by getting governing structures of authority and agents of the state out of the way.
So now we have the problem. So here we go. So now I'm going to ask this, because I'm of the thought, I agree partially where you're going, but this is where I have the disagreement, and you can answer it however you want. So there are definitely problems that I believe that the federal government is their job. They are the ones responsible for it, such as our military, such as our national minimum wage, our the environment. Those things that I believe that the federal government is absolutely positively responsible for. What I think I'm hearing you say is you want to reduce the size of government. Am I correct?
Yeah. So I'm a minarchist.
Okay, understand.
My ideal is pretty straightforward. The ideal federal government, in my opinion, as a minarchist, which we'll never get to in my lifetime, even if we elect a libertarian president and work through this for decades, because it's a long way from where we're at. But minimally, we should have a military that can protect us from invasion. That doesn't mean we go gallivanting around the world. And we have courts to adjudicate disputes between people. When there is a dispute between someone saying my liberty has been violated by this person, and law enforcement to be able to, a basic law enforcement, to be able to enforce those disputes when they are adjudicated. And so other than that, most stuff should be done at the best at local levels. Like, we should decentralize our government away from being this massive central plan thing and bring it back more to our neighborhoods. And the reason being, we know our communities, we know our families, we know our neighbors, we know our towns a lot better than a bureaucrat in the federal government in Washington, D.C. They know you as a number on a spreadsheet. They know you as a statistic for their office to look at. They don't know you. And this is why I think we should take power away from a central force in Washington, D.C., and return those powers back to, individual people, and then to local governments, and then to state governments, and really have the federal government be the least intrusive in our lives. Let's bring it back to the individual as much as possible. Is kind of our governing philosophy as libertarians.
Understand, but here comes my other question, and this has to do about the economy. So my next couple of questions. So let's just say you're successful, you win the presidency, somehow the Congress becomes all of a sudden cooperative, and they reduce the size of government. My basic question is, so there are people at the federal government who hold jobs. Would there be some sort of program in place to have them get another job? Or would they just have to go and hope the free market has something that had them at the previous level of income?
So, so this is a great question. And the guy who's running for president of Argentina, who's leading the pack, he's a libertarian. He's probably about to get elected president of Argentina. He talks about he wants to eliminate this department, that department, this department, that department. And they ask him, like, how are you going to do that? And he said, well, we're going to do this in a way that's an orderly transition away from this. We'll give people a year or 18 months to say, your department will not exist in 18 months. You can continue working here in the meantime, but start looking for another job. And if you get another job, great. We won't be replacing you. We'll either move somebody from within to keep doing your job, or work with less people until eventually in 18 months or a year, however much you put onto it, this department will cease to exist. This will allow people to transition themselves out of the private marketplace or the public marketplace of federal government into either, where if we are dissolving these departments federally, they might go part of their state department of doing the same job at the state level, if this dissolves itself into a state office. Or if it goes into a localized level, Well, maybe they're doing that same job just in their town, right, as part of the local government. Or maybe that job disappears altogether and they find a related job in the field in the private marketplace. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to just snap your fingers and do it overnight. Much the same with Social Security and other things, like I said. If you do that, that provides a major shock to the economy. If we want those jobs to appear for those people as we're reducing the public workforce, we don't want to do so in a way that shocks the private workforce, that causes their jobs to contract. We want to do so in an orderly way that allows for a transition that the market expects, that allows for the market to have orderly growth and provide these jobs. You don't want to shock the economy. You want to let the economy know what you're doing. You want to give them long-term strategy, because that's the problem we've been having so much, is we have been having politicians that think about the next financial quarter or the next election date, when really we need to be having politicians and government that plans for the next 5 years, 10 years, the next quarter century, in terms of how we're going to transition ourselves into a way where we create more broad prosperity and real growth, as opposed to the bubble burst economies we've been seeing my entire adult life. And so, yeah, we won't just fire them on day one and be like, you're gone. What we'll say is, this department is going to disappear. You need to start looking for another job in your field. Or, hey, maybe this is the time for you to start your own business, or to, find a job in a related field in the private market, whatever. But we're going to give you the time to transition away from that.
Because I thought, as soon as you said that, I thought of one agency that I know is dictated by the Constitution, and that's the United States Post Office.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, my dad worked with the post office. I have many family members, I'll say it that way, that work with them. So I'm thinking, well, you can't just get rid of the post office because it's constitutionally mandated. That's the one that I kind of just jumped in my head when I was asking that question, was like the post office.
Well, anything that's constitutionally mandated, of course, you would have to keep in place until you would have a constitutional amendment to get rid of it, right? But anything that's not explicitly spelled out constitutionally, we should really look for private market alternatives. And there are actually private market alternatives to the post office. We have FedEx and DHL and UPS, and pretty soon Amazon's going to be doing their own package delivery. They're just going to be bypassing everything. I mean, they already do. They bypass everything altogether nowadays. They have their own planes, their own logistics delivery system. So there are alternatives that exist. And in fact, our neighbors to the north, Canada, who have government-run healthcare even, they have a private postal system. So, I mean, I believe the UK also has a private postal system. So there are ways to have postal systems outside of the government. But if it's constitutionally mandated, the only way you get rid of that would be to pass an amendment of some sort, right? But there are alternatives, certainly.
I understand. And so now that you've been talking about the private marketplace, the private marketplace, the private marketplace, I'm going to, no, I'm not. Are you speaking of the small mom and pop type marketplace, or are we leaning more towards the larger corporations, Stellantis, Ford, Amazon, Walmart type of marketplace? Or are you talking about a combination of both?
So I believe in letting those competitors compete, right? But what I think we should stop doing is what we have right now is we have a corporate-controlled crony capitalist society. I believe in the free market capitalism. I don't believe in corporatized cronyism capitalism, which is what we have right now, where we have these giant mega firms that get all the subsidies, they get all the nooks and crannies for the tax code, and it leaves the mom and pop, the small businesses out to dry, which are really the driving engine of our economy. Small businesses create the most jobs in our country. And so what we need to stop doing is propping up these large, giant firms at the expense of small business. We remove all the subsidies. We remove all the government picking the winners and losers in the marketplace, and just allow these small businesses to work through the marketplace, compete. The best ones will eventually grow and start competing with the medium businesses, and those medium-sized businesses will compete and grow and eventually compete with the larger firms. And the larger firms, as they exist, well, if they get too big and they overextend themselves and they fail, well, they should fail. They should fall. They should break apart into pieces, be liquidated, and let other entrepreneurs pick up their stock and start their businesses. That's how the marketplace is supposed to work. It shouldn't be controlled by central planners in DC who are making, like a few thousands of decisions every year. It should be controlled by the individual consumers who make trillions of decisions every year. That's how we get the best idea of what what the marketplace wants and what should be provided and how we keep costs under control is by allowing the free market to really do its thing. What we have not ever had in this country in a long time is any kind of marketplace resembling that. Frankly, right now we have a very corporate controlled government, and I would seek to remove corporate control by removing corporate influence altogether from government by reducing the government to a size where the market's just going to compete with itself.
So, staying on the economy, there's another issue that is extremely important to me, and that's a living wage. Um, I feel that a person that works should get paid a certain amount. What is the libertarian slash your stand on that issue? Do you think there should be a minimum wage, a living wage, or the answer that I think you're going to lean towards is letting the free markets determine that?
Yeah. So the true minimum wage is $0, right? The true minimum wage is zero, which is what, say an intern works for, right? At an office, and they're working for free. They're fetching the coffee. They're making their connections. They're learning their stuff. And in fact, it could even be an expense, right? You're paying to go to college to become an intern. And you do that with the understanding that you're going to get a job one day that allows you to basically make all that money back. And so the true minimum wage is zero. When we create minimum wages, what we do is we create a floor for anybody to participate in the economy. And sometimes there are people who are not going to be, valued at that minimum wage. And when you do that, you're pricing them out of being able to get introduced into the marketplace, learn skills, and then be able to grow within that marketplace. The minimum wage should not be where anybody aspires to be, whether it's government mandated or not, right? I don't think $7.25 an hour, which I think is still the federal minimum wage, should be where anybody really aspires to be. That is an introductory wage to get somebody into the marketplace to learn skills and ability to be able to grow within it. Oftentimes it's, and most people don't live on that minimum wage. Nearly the entire country does not live at $7.25 an hour. There are few people who do, and a lot of those are students and people who are just getting their first job, right? And we want them to learn those skills so they can get their second job that pays better. And so I don't believe, there is a necessary for a minimum wage because most people are already working above what the government mandated minimum wage is anyway. And even when you do that at the local level or state level, most people are still working above that set minimum wage. What we need to do is to allow for businesses to be created, for jobs to be created. And what we need to do is remove the red tape in the federal code that prevents people from doing that, particularly new entrepreneurs. One of the things I say all the time is like, there are so many regulations and regulatory things around like introductory workers. Like, why should you have to pay like $80 a year to get a certification to cut or braid hair? Why should you have to pay, like I did, $45 a year, a pouring license to be a server who serves beer? I wasn't tested on if I can pour beer effectively. What's that $45 for? It's just revenue generation. Similarly, I think it's like in Gwinnett County where I grew up, it was $125 a year to be a fortune teller, right? Why does government need that for somebody who's just starting their business to be whatever, To me, there's lots of barriers to the marketplace that exist that are just where government's taking their little bit here and there out of people's productivity. And I would seek to remove that and let the market kind of do its thing. And I know you disagree with me on that, and that's fine. Here's the thing. I want to start getting libertarians elected at the state and local level, and we can start putting those things into practice. And once we do, we can have proof of concept for you. I understand it's not something that you're going to agree with me on today, but I hope that one day as libertarians get elected and we start to put these more market practices into place, you can see the prosperity that it builds. And one day say, hey, we disagreed on it, but now we maybe agree on it more than we did. And if it doesn't work, if it completely fails and it all falls apart, I can say, maybe we should enforce living wages and things like this. But I just don't think there's ever, anytime the government tries to centrally plan those things, it leads eventually to shortages and eventually where the economy doesn't work.
And I thought, you know what, I better tell them where I stand on it because I'm very pro labor.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, yes, ask for it. You're making these companies rich. You should get something. There should be a minimum. So I thought, well, I better just make sure that I'm being
I support private unions and private guilds being able to do their thing and being able to form together and put their capital together. Because as a worker, your labor is capital. That has a cost. That has a value to it. Every worker has value, and they should be able to put themselves together and band together and unite as one group, and be able to say, hey, if you work with this group of people, we're the best trained, we're the best whatever, we can provide you the best service. Here's what we're asking you for. Similarly, though, that shouldn't be required of a worker. A worker shouldn't be required to join a union or required to join any guild. In fact, I think, when you do that, you put marketplace competition. A union can say, hey, we cost a little bit more, but we do X number a bit better. And let me show you the metrics of why we do better. And, I think that's the value of labor and the value of capital. Every worker has value. Every worker has capital. And they should absolutely be able to join that together with other workers to be able to bargain against management. I don't oppose that at all, actually, except for public sector unions. That's a whole different thing because they already have the force of government behind them. They're already funded through taxpayer dollars. That's a whole different thing. But private unions, go for it.
Yep, I understand. And here is another issue um, that both parties, I often argue on my page. If you're following me on Facebook, I have been getting rung through the ringer about somebody tell me the difference between the Democrat and Republican Party. I can't seem to find it. I don't know if it's because I'm not smart or it's just there's really literally no difference. And the reason I'm giving all this kind of backstory is I posted, um, there's nothing you're going to, because I don't think I'll ever vote Republican. I can't see it. I don't.
Me neither.
I can't see it. So I'm harder on the Democrats because if I'm looking at all the parties major, they're a little bit closer to what I think, but they really aren't because they do nothing that I'm saying. Here's where my question becomes. When we start talking about things such as the Ukrainian war or the conflict in Israel right now, with Palestine using Hamas to bomb, the whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
I literally see no difference between the two parties. We've given Israel, I forget the amount of money we give them every single year. And when a politician says, maybe we should, no, let me backtrack that. I've never heard a politician, Democrat or Republican, ever say decrease funding to Israel. I've never heard a politician, Democrat or Republican, say, let's decrease military funding. What would your administration stance be on, in general, the funding of foreign countries, foreign aid, and militarization? And I know that's a big question, but I had to kind of throw them all in there.
It's a really needed question, right? So first and foremost, I got my start in politics being an anti-war activist. And so I oppose war. I hate war. I think the only time the United States should be engaging in a war is when we've been directly threatened and we're being, fought against. I don't like us engaging in military adventurism around the world. And I think if you look particularly in Israel and Gaza, I think if you looked in the region, a heavy military hand of the United States in the Middle East has not been really shown to create prosperity and stability in the region. And if in fact it's more unstable than it even was pre 9/11, if you can believe it. Like we've completely destabilized that entire region of the world my entire adult life. And so when you look at both the conflict in Ukraine, which I think we should not be really funding currently militarily, I think we should be asking that our European neighbors do, considering we've already given a lot of money to Ukraine. And we've already been by far the lion's share of funding for NATO. I think the other NATO nations, if they want to fund the military solution there, they can continue doing that. But we need to be funding the humanitarian solution. And by that, I mean, if you're in Ukraine and you want to get out of there, we should be able to bring you here as a refugee, let you stay here until the war is over. And then you can decide whether you want to stay here and kind of continue living here or go back to Ukraine. We should make that same offer to any Russian military member who's currently fighting in Ukraine right now. Demoralize the Russian military, get a lot of them to abandon their post and come to the United States as refugees on asylum, and watch as they lose the morale to keep fighting forward in Ukraine and go back across the border and sue for peace. We should be doing the same for Gaza and for Israel. My heart goes out to both people out there. the Israelis who have had their neighborhoods just invaded by horrible, barbaric acts, so many people being killed and slaughtered at a music festival. Imagine, you're at a concert and just all of a sudden hundreds of people around you are being shot to death as you flee for your life. Imagine hearing that your neighbors have been killed or taken hostage. It's horrible. And if such a thing were to occur in the United States, we would expect our government to respond. And so we have to expect Israel to respond. But the tragedy of this is that their response is going to kill so many innocent people in Gaza who had nothing to do with this. They're not part of Hamas. They're living in Gaza in basically what is an open air prison a lot of the time. It's walled in. They don't control what goes in or out. That's controlled by Egypt and by Israel. The standard of living is very low there. They're hugely densely populated. And half the population is children. Over 1 million people there are under the age of 18. And when we see that, hundreds of kids are dying as a result of these Israeli airstrikes, we have to pray for peace. We have to be just advocates that both of these sides can come together and form some sort of two-state solution. And I know that's not going to happen in the immediate because of what's happened with Hamas. But I hope that Israel understands that the larger their footprint is in this response, the harder it's going to be to bring both these parties together in the end and in the long run to create peace in the region. And that's really what we should be hoping for. But the United States can't control that meeting. We can't set those terms because it's not our place to do that. And with regards to, again, foreign aid and military aid, we have given Israel far more than it needs to defend itself. They can handle this. We don't need to be getting involved militarily there. And with regards to foreign aid, we need to end foreign aid because the program is an inefficient way to help those developing economies, and there are better ways to do that don't involve taking money from the working man in the richest country in the world and giving it to the richest man in the developing world, which is what we're doing. So I think there's better ways to facilitate economic development around the world than with foreign aid. Certainly.
I have to ask about the proverbial elephant in the room, the border wall.
Mm-hmm.
I had the unfortunate task of watching the Republican National Committee debate. I watched it twice, the first time and the second time. I'm just self-punishing myself. I don't know why I did it, but I did. And one of the things, and I hear this on both sides, that somehow our border crisis, let me backtrack, that we should stop giving foreign aid and concentrate on a wall in China. Not wall in China, I'm sorry, wall in Mexico. I've never heard of a Canadian wall between us and Canada. Probably won't. But I'm wondering what the libertarian stance is on the I don't want to call it a crisis because I feel like the United States has interfered in those people's countries and they have no choice but to flee those countries because they're so devastated.
Mm-hmm.
But what is the libertarian stance on addressing what the media is calling the immigration crisis?
So you're right. The reason why a lot of them are fleeing, first off, is like our war on drugs creates the cartels that create the violence that bring them up here. You're right, absolutely. And it is a crisis, but it's not a crisis of immigration. It's a crisis of government's failure to address immigration and to properly handle immigration. Because our immigration system is so complicated, costly, and confusing, millions of people sidestep the way to become a worker in this country. And so what we need to do is we need to simplify that system. Just give us Ellis Island style immigration like we used to have, where you would come off the boat. Hey, if you're not sick, if you're not wanted for a crime, come on over here and work. We should be able to do that. Allow these people who want to come here, which is the vast majority, proverbially the 99% of the people who want to come here and just work, put down roots, do their thing, provide prosperity. Many of them just want to be seasonal labor. If they could, they would come up and work the harvest and they would take their money back home if they could. They can't because it's too hard to get back and have to get back over again. But if we ease the immigration system, allow that, we'd have much more seasonal immigration. And for the millions of people who are here right now without documentation, they're living in the shadows. They're so easy to be exploited. They can be exploited for their labor because they can't go run to they can't run to somebody saying I'm being exploited for my labor, I'm being abused or neglected at work, And then think about the real human cost is like how many kids How many kids of immigrants right now maybe are being abused by a teacher or a coach or a pastor or a family member, and they're scared to go tell an authority member because they know that they're immigrants or that their parents are immigrants, and they're scared they'll be deported? How many immigrant spouses suffer domestic disputes, and they can't go to a shelter? They can't escape that because if they're found to be an immigrant, well, they'll be deported back. That's the real human cost of what we have when we have this immigration system that leaves people in the shadows. So we need to ease the system for people to come here and work and get out of the shadows. And we can also at the same time ease the process for those people who want to become citizens to let them become citizens. I'm all for it. Bring more diversity to this country. It's a great melting pot. I welcome it. And when we do that, when we focus, when we no longer focus on the 99% of people proverbially that are doing just coming here to work, we can really put the focus of our law enforcement and border enforcement on those who are bringing people over here for the purposes of human or labor exploitation, sexual exploitation, because that really does happen. And we need to focus on those folks who are being abused at the border and not people who just want to come here and work, provide opportunity, and put down roots for them and their family. I think that's the best way to solve this crisis, which again, it's not a crisis because people want to come here and live here. In fact, we should be welcoming them. We are a nation of immigrants. We should continue that. But the crisis is that government has just failed in their response to properly address how people can come here with documentation and not be left in the shadows. And so as a candidate for president, I will be seeking to simplify our immigration system by any means necessary. So that way we can bring more people who want to come here and work, let them do that, put their roots down, address those who are coming here and exploiting people, and address them with proper law enforcement, and really bring these people out of the shadows so they're not being exploited anymore. I think that's the compassionate way to do things. It's a libertarian policy to get government out of the free movement of people and to just let the market determine who's going to come here and work. And if the jobs aren't here, they're not going to come here and work. That's just plain and simple. So let's treat people with a little bit of humanity and compassion, as opposed to throwing them in cages at the border or building giant walls. Build bridges, not walls.
And that is a good place not to end, because I think I have two more. Well, no, one more question. Well, two more questions. There's another issue that I always hear about, but it's not a real issue. This is something that I think both the Democrats and Republicans are very, very, very guilty of. And it's this whole notion of China is bad and America is good. And how that plays out in terms of our foreign policy, how this administration recently gave a huge amount of money to Taiwan, which I believe is not its own country, but it's a region in China, if I'm correct. I might not be, but I think it
Yeah,
is.
it's an island off the coast of mainland China.
Right. It's not its own country. I
We do
don't.
not consider them China. They consider themselves China.
Right.
They consider
That's what I was
themselves.
going to say. We don't consider them Chinese, but they actually are, because they're not an independent nation.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing. Like, we semi-recognize them. We give them military aid. We just don't declare them as China. We declare them as Taiwan, though they
Right.
call themselves China. It's a weird thing.
Yeah, I'm like, well, they call
But here's the
themselves Chinese, but we don't. But
yeah. So
and and where I'm getting at this, I'll tell you exactly where I'm getting at this at. I am not here to say that the Chinese government, the Russian government, are these great beacons of democracy. That is not what I do not want anybody to sit and say that's what I'm saying. However, this false narrative that the American government built itself as this city on a hill that can't be hidden and it's the greatest thing there ever is, was, and ever going to be, I personally don't buy into. So my question is, any presidential candidate or anybody that is going to be president is going to have to sell no, let me backtrack. Does a American president such as yourself, would President Oliver sell American exceptionalism, or would you portray more of a realistic this is what America is, and this is how we need to improve. I think I know the answer to this, but
Well, I certainly don't think our government is perfect. And I don't think that it's really representative of the amazing ability of the American people and the American worker. And I don't think it's, I don't think it's this genetic exceptionalism that we just, because we're born in America, we're somehow going to be better. I think what, hopefully, the best of the American experiment is in terms of freedom and the ability for people to make their own destiny, and why so many people want to come here and live here is because there's kind of an exceptional way of life. I have a lot of friends from Europe, and they can tell you like there's something kind of like some sort of electricity kind of in the air when you're in America. Like there's something always happening to them. Like they feel like we're a country that is always looking to like kind of be kinetic and moving and providing energy, right? And they say, sometimes they don't feel that same stuff at home. What is that American X factor? What is that? I think a lot of that is we just have a legacy of individualism that maybe does not exist in some other nations around the world. But the truth is like when it comes to trade with other nations, we need to be realistic. We're a market economy. We need to be focusing on, market trade with other people. I don't want to go to war with Taiwan. I don't want to go to war with or war in Taiwan. I don't want to go to war with China. I had a guy who asked me, he's like in his 80s. He sat me down and he said, I just have one question for you if you're elected president. Will you pass a draft to send good men and women to go fight in Taiwan like they did for good men when I was young to go fight in Vietnam? And I said, no, I would not. I would not institute a draft to go fight a war in Taiwan. And he said, good. That's the most important thing to me is that we save American troops for American wars and not for wars overseas. And so if we're going to compete with China, it needs to be economically, not militarily. I'm not looking to fight a war with China, though I can say we would absolutely be able to display military superiority. A lot of what we see with this is saber rattling. It's saber rattling from China because they want to be seen as competing with the United States on like this military level, and it ups their reputation on the world stage. And of course, for here, why are they saber rattling with China? Because the military industrial complex needs to make sure that we're passing the next weapon system and we're spending more and more money on the Pentagon. And so they want to make it seem like China's this big bad threat. The truth is we trade so much with each other. We're so economically interdependent. A war between the United States and China would be mutually assured economic destruction of both of our economies. And so I don't think there's an appetite for war really between either side. It's just a bunch of posturing on the world stage.
yep, definitely, definitely that I can agree with, and a whole lot of other stuff he said, just not the minimum wage part. But
Hey, agree to disagree.
agree to disagree. Final question of the night: how can people connect to your campaign?
Absolutely. Well, there's a couple ways they can do it. So if you want to check out my website, it's votechaseoliver.com. You can go to votechaseoliver.com. You can see all my issues, positions, our press releases, our event calendar, how to get you involved as either a delegate or a national convention, because that's how we pick our people. We have delegates that get selected at the state level, and then they go to the national convention, and then they vote on the floor for who our nominee is going to be. And so if you want to get involved with your state party and become a delegate, we can get you connected there. There's all kinds of ways you can involve with a campaign at votechaseoliver.com. If you want a shortcut for that, just text Chase to 21,000. You just text Chase to 21,000. You'll get connected right where you need to go to be a supporter of this campaign. And of course, if you want to find me on social media, Chase for Liberty is the handle you're looking for on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it these days, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Look for Chase for Liberty. Search for that. You should find me.
I want to thank everyone. Although we didn't get any questions, this is our unusual time because we normally come on at 7. But I had a previous engagement. I could not change it. I definitely appreciate Chase being so patient, even though I was about 10 to 15 minutes late. It's a one-time thing. I try not to be late, but
It happens. I was an hour and a half late to my event in Detroit, Michigan because of a flight delay. So it happens. That's
but you
life.
had an excuse. Well, I sort of had an excuse, but we will hopefully return to our normal time. I'm still working on an interview that I'm hoping to have next week. If we do not, I will still be here next Thursday, 7 p.m. And you know what I will do? I will pick probably a silly topic. I do it all the time when I can't find a guest. But remember to like this video, share this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the channel. I'm going to say it one more time. Subscribe to the channel. Visit my website at TRACYMediaLLC.com and sign up for the virtual scavenger hunt that's going to be November the 4th. Join us November the 7th for the first round of presidential, not debate, we're calling it a discussion, where we'll be discussing, have several candidates all on at one time, and looking forward to that. So I want to thank everyone. Thank you. Have a great evening. Good night.